Hey guys, tonight we drift into a world where the air itself seems charged with quiet electricity, and somewhere, just beyond the edge of consciousness, Athena leans close, her voice brushing your mind like silk over stone. You trudge along dusty paths that twist between olive groves, their leaves trembling with moonlight, and you can almost feel the goddess smirking at your mortal curiosity. Because, spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this without tripping over a few existential questions. So right before we dive in, show some love with a like and subscribe if you're truly having fun hanging out here. And while you do that, why not type your location and local time? I'm curious where in the world you're hovering as we step into myth tonight. Take a deep breath, let the noise of the day fade, and join me as we slide into tonight's journey side by side. You find yourself moving through Athens, but not the Athens you read about in textbooks. The streets are narrower, winding in impossible patterns, lit by flickering torches that smell faintly of olive oil. The city hums with the quiet energy of thought and creation. You sense her presence before you see it. Athena, the gray-eyed goddess, stepping lightly among the shadows, her hand extended toward mortals who don't even know they are listening. Historians still argue whether the stories of her direct interventions were meant literally or as symbolic reminders of human ingenuity. But here, in the thick velvet of night, it doesn't matter. A strange thing brushes against your awareness, the whisper of ideas not yet fully formed. Athena doesn't command, she teases. A strategy half-thought, a riddle half-spoken, the tiniest push of insight. You probably won't notice most of them. Most dreams are too stubbornly mortal. But if you linger long enough, you'll catch the hint of something greater. Fringe tales even suggest that she visits minds in more literal ways, sliding into sleep like a shadow under the eyelids, planting visions of inventions, poems, or even strange omens. One scholar suggests this is all metaphor. Another argues there may have been actual nocturnal rituals designed to invite her guidance. Either way, you feel it now, a tickle of foresight that makes your pulse quicken just enough to know the night is alive. You wander past the marketplace. Merchants argue in low tones, not about coin, but about dreams that came true. Some claiming to have sewn olive branches into their cloth as Athena whispered solutions to their trade problems. You think about how often people forget that ideas can arrive in the softest form, a suggestion, a half-thought, a sudden, inexplicable certainty that you should take a different path home. And while the historians debate whether she literally inspired the wisdom of Athens or if it is just poetic license, the street smells of bread, smoke, and something indefinably ancient, grounding you in a city that feels simultaneously alive and mythical. At the edge of the agora, you notice a small bronze owl perched atop a column. It blinks at you, or perhaps that's just a trick of the firelight. Athena's symbol, yes, but there's more. Fringe interpretations insist these owls could have been more than talismans. They were dream messengers, conduits for divine counsel. You can't help smiling at the thought of an owl tap-dancing across your subconscious, dropping hints about courage, strategy, or poetry while you slept. And as your eyes follow the owl's gaze, you realize she's always a step ahead, her guidance subtle, often missed, but always there. Even now, walking through streets empty of mortals but full of imagined possibility, you feel her. a whisper in the quiet clatter of the city, a shadow brushing your shoulder as if to say, "Look here, think there, try it, mortal." You think of her mythic birth, springing fully armed from Zeus's skull, and laugh softly. A deity literally popping out of someone's head to give advice. You shake your own, as if this action alone could dispel the strangeness. But the thought lingers, warm and electric, as if the city itself has absorbed her wisdom and is leaking it into your veins. By the time you reach the hill overlooking the Acropolis, the city below sparkles with torchlight, olive trees shifting like restless dreams. You remember that historians still argue whether the earliest Athenians truly honored her in these spaces, or if the stories were later embellishments. Fringe accounts say the real ceremonies were nocturnal, shadowy, whispering things into young minds under blankets of olive branches. And here you are, a quiet witness to it all, feeling her presence like a cool draft slipping under the door, touching the skin of your imagination. You settle on the grassy incline, the wind carrying scents of thyme and stone. Athena's whispers are faint, teasing, dancing on the edge of comprehension. You probably won't record any of them perfectly. Most mortals never do. But you feel the suggestion of wisdom planting itself like a seed in your skull, and you wonder, half smiling, whether anyone else can hear it, or if this is a solitary audience granted to the night, to the dreamer, to you. You breathe in, letting the wind carry the faint hum of the city into your chest, and just for a moment, you understand. Even if she is gone tomorrow, her whispers are already tangled with your own thoughts, inseparable and insistently, gently guiding. You trudge down from the Acropolis, olive branches crunching faintly beneath your feet, and catch yourself staring at a single tree that seems different. Its leaves glint silver in the moonlight, and you swear the scent is richer than the others. Earthy, bitter, and oddly sweet at once. This is no ordinary olive. You realize with a shiver of delight that you are standing in the very shadow of Athena's gift, the tree she planted for Athens, the one that would secure the city's name, its wealth, and its destiny. Historians still argue whether it was Poseidon or Athena who truly won the city's favor with their divine gifts. But you don't need to choose. You feel the contest in your bones, like standing between two storm clouds, and you know the goddess has already whispered her answer. As you circle the tree, your fingers brushing the rough bark, you notice the olives themselves seem almost impossibly perfect. Fringe tales claim that the fruit of Athena's first tree could confer sudden clarity or even prophetic glimpses to the lucky few who consumed it. You pop one into your mouth, thinking better of it immediately, because you have zero evidence anyone survived that experiment without tripping over their own ambition. Still, the possibility makes your pulse quicken. The tree is a symbol, yes, but also a reminder that divine influence often comes as subtle suggestion, an idea planted in mortal minds, as much as a fruit planted in the soil. You wander through the early streets of Athens, noting the small, deliberate decisions that mark a city touched by a goddess. Houses orient themselves toward the morning sun. Workshops cluster around the agora, and even the street layouts hint at order and strategy. Fringe stories insist Athena's influence extended to architecture itself, that she whispered measurements, proportions, and angles into the dreams of builders. You chuckle at the thought of sleepless stonemasons suddenly waking up to precise ratios scribbled in the air above their beds. Historians still argue whether early Athenians truly followed such divine nudges, or if these patterns were simply human genius retroactively ascribed to the gods. Near a quiet fountain, you notice women drawing water and children playing with small clay figurines of owls and warriors. The goddess's touch is everywhere, in plain sight and hidden in the mundane. You imagine Athena leaning close as they sleep, murmuring ideas of prudence, courage, and craft. You remember the fringe accounts claiming that some Athenians actually performed ritual dream invites, scattering olive leaves on pillows to entice her visits. It's ridiculous, yet strangely convincing as you inhale the olive-scented night air, feeling the city hum with potential. The agora beckons, and you stroll among early traders and philosophers, sensing Athena's strategic whispers shaping debates and transactions alike. Merchants haggle with unexpected cunning, children recount clever riddles, and the occasional philosopher scribbles notes in the margin of a tablet, inspired by ideas that feel too quick, too bright, and entirely unearned. You smile, recalling the odd fringe tale of an Athenian who supposedly designed an olive press after a dream where an owl perched on his shoulder and winked. Historians still argue whether these anecdotes reflect myth-making or real inspiration, but the story sticks, lingering in your imagination like the faint taste of the olives you dare not eat again. As dawn begins to creep over the horizon, the city shifts subtly, bathed in pale gold. You feel Athena's presence linger even as her footsteps fade from the streets. It is not a showy exit. There are no trumpets, no divine fanfare. Just the quiet hum of human minds, slightly sharper, slightly braver, slightly wiser than before, touched by a goddess who prefers whispers over shouts. You trudge back toward the olive tree, glancing up at the Acropolis that glimmers in the morning light. Here is the seed of civilization, the tangible mark of a deity who chooses subtlety, who gifts strategy and craft instead of brute force. And you, observer of it all, feel the thrill of understanding, even if just for a heartbeat, that some wisdom is planted to grow slowly, through human hands, human sweat, and human dreams. You drift into the quieter streets of Athens, the air thick with the mingling scents of baked bread and olive oil, and notice the faint hum of looms in the distance. Athena's influence is subtle here, in the rhythm of shuttles weaving through warp threads, in the delicate precision of fingers looping yarn. You step closer, almost imperceptibly, feeling the goddess's whispers guide each movement. Not a command, but a suggestion, a nudge that says, "Try it this way, see what emerges." Historians still argue whether these tales of divine inspiration and craft were intended literally or as allegories for human skill. But standing here, you feel the pulse of possibility in every completed cloth. Fringe stories claim that some looms were enchanted, or at least blessed, so that under moonlight, the threads shimmered with prophetic patterns. You squint at a strip of fabric, imagining it flickering with messages, the designs whispering advice about love, battle strategy, or civic duty. You laugh softly at the absurdity of a textile giving you life counsel, yet the idea tickles your imagination. You remember reading somewhere that the very word techne, from which we get technique, was sacred to Athena, tying her guidance not just to heroism or warfare, but to the tactile, precise work of human hands. You wander deeper into a small workshop where a young woman threads her loom with intense concentration. The pattern she weaves seems ordinary at first, geometric shapes, neat borders. But as you watch, you notice subtle anomalies, tiny symbols almost hidden within the design. Fringe accounts insist these were messages from Athena herself, glimpses of future events woven into mortal textiles. You try not to roll your eyes at the thought, yet the quiet hum of possibility is addictive. The goddess's presence is not loud or dramatic here. It is a whisper, brushing the edges of your mind while the world carries on in ordinary rhythms. Nearby, you hear the sound of conversation. Elder women discuss civic matters while simultaneously teaching apprentices how to spin flax into fine linen. Athena's whispering guidance seems to permeate everything, from the arrangement of threads to the cadence of their speech. You recall that historians debate the practical influence of mythology on daily craft, whether these stories shaped real techniques or were post facto moralizing tales. But you can feel the line blur, the separation of divine and human becoming less rigid under the soft glow of morning. As you stroll through the workshop, you notice a half-finished tapestry depicting a small city on a hill, olive trees dotting the slopes, and a lone warrior with an owl perched on his shoulder. Fringe scholars suggest that such images were intended as instructional tools, subtly teaching strategy and ethics through cloth. You chuckle softly, thinking of the first time someone tried to read a woven pattern for hints about their future, like fortune-telling but with more thread and less clarity. And yet, standing here, you understand the metaphor is also a truth. Wisdom often comes stitched into mundane acts, into the repetition of hands moving in rhythm, guided by the quiet suggestion of insight. Even as the sun rises, painting the workshop in gentle gold, you feel Athena's presence lingering over the looms, a silent mentor whose influence is felt rather than shouted. You imagine generations of Athenian artisans learning, making mistakes, correcting themselves, and all the while absorbing the subtle guidance of a goddess whose favorite method of instruction is the faintest whisper. You trudge past the final loom, fingers brushing the smooth, warm fabric, and realize that the goddess's wisdom is not only in grand strategy or heroics, it's here, in these threads, in the patterns of life, urging humans to see, understand, and create. And as you step back into the streets, the smell of fresh linen and oil clinging faintly to your senses, you can't help but smile at the idea that every creation carries a trace of divine suggestion, waiting for you to notice it in your dreams. You wander further, the morning sun warming the stones beneath your feet, and feel the subtle shift in the air as Athena's influence reaches young warriors, like a gentle draft moving across a battlefield before it even begins. You notice a boy swinging a practice sword, clumsy yet intent, and a flicker of something, confidence, insight, appears in his eyes. Athena is there, nudging, shaping courage, reminding you that heroism often starts in the smallest of gestures. Historians still argue whether the divine inspiration in myths like Perseus's training was literal intervention or poetic storytelling. But standing here, you sense a pulse of guidance that transcends mortal effort. Fringe tales suggest that Athena didn't only whisper strategy or heroism in waking hours. She visited dreamers, planting cryptic symbols in their sleep. You imagine a young Perseus tossing and turning, visions of winged sandals or serpentine monsters unfolding in his subconscious. It's ridiculous and delightful at once. The kind of thought that makes you grin at the absurdity while also feeling that tingle of possibility. You probably wouldn't survive your first encounter with a Gorgon either, but Athena's quiet hints prepare mortals for impossible tasks in the most subtle way, planting confidence in dreams before it manifests in action. You pause at a small courtyard where a group of youths practices archery. The tension in their muscles, the careful draw of the bow, it all feels orchestrated, yet no one directs it. The whisper is invisible but palpable, Athena's reminder that precision and patience are as valuable as raw strength. Fringe accounts even claim that sometimes a whispered suggestion would arrive in a particularly vivid dream, revealing an angle or a tactic no teacher could articulate. Historians debate whether these stories reflect actual rituals where young warriors invited divine guidance in sleep, or are simply later embellishments meant to romanticize training, but the sense of quiet strategy in the courtyard is undeniable. Nearby, you notice an older mentor watching, his eyes sharp yet knowing. Perhaps he senses what you feel, that the goddess's influence is less about hero-making and more about self-discovery. Athena doesn't wave a sword in their hands. She plants insight, guiding mortals toward decisions that feel their own. Fringe scholars even argue that some of these dream-guided instructions were responsible for military innovations, suggesting that the line between divine inspiration and human ingenuity is blurrier than we like to admit. You smirk at the thought of generals in long robes consulting their pillows for battle plans. The sun climbs higher, and you find yourself tracing the paths of these young warriors, imagining them years later facing the challenges that myths immortalized. Athena's whispers are faint yet persistent, threading through training, guiding intuition, sharpening instincts, you think, about how Perseus would later face Medusa, the knowledge of the reflective shield perhaps first seeded in some half-remembered dream. You laugh softly at the idea of a goddess acting like a cosmic life coach, but the lesson is there. Inspiration is often invisible, arriving in the tiniest of nudges, shaping courage and cunning before the moment of necessity. As you leave the courtyard, the air hums with anticipation, and you feel the faintest tickle of something extraordinary. Athena is gone, yet her presence lingers, a whisper threading through the minds of mortals who will one day carve legends from her subtle guidance. You trudge on, half awake, half dreaming, and recognize a pattern. Wisdom is never forced, never loud. It creeps, infiltrates, and finally blooms in human action, leaving behind the faintest trace of divine influence for anyone patient enough to notice. You trudge along a narrow ridge overlooking a training ground, the scent of damp earth and pine curling around your senses, and feel Athena's presence ripple through the soldiers practicing their drills. Her guidance here is subtle but unmistakable. A tilt of the head, a whisper of intuition, a pause in the chaos that makes them see angles others miss. You watch as young recruits fumble with spears and shields, yet somehow a strategy blooms from their mistakes, a rhythm of movement that seems planned. Historians still argue whether the myths of Athena's battlefield council are literal or simply poetic ways to explain human ingenuity under pressure. Standing here, though, you feel a pulse of awareness in the air, a quiet shaping of action that could be divine, or at least remarkable human instinct. Fringe accounts suggest that some soldiers reported receiving dreams the night before battle, visions of formations and enemy positions delivered with surreal clarity. You imagine the scene: a lieutenant waking with a start, jotting down strange geometric patterns, then realizing hours later that the pattern corresponds perfectly with the morning's maneuver. You can't help but chuckle at the thought of dream-inspired war plans. It's absurd, and yet in this air, it almost feels plausible. Athena's guidance is never overt. It's more like a flickering flashlight in a foggy field, illuminating just enough to prevent catastrophe. You move closer to a group practicing formations, noting how minor adjustments, foot placement, shield angles, spear lengths, suddenly produce an efficiency that seems uncanny. Fringe scholars have proposed that stories of Athena whispering battle advice may have arisen from ancient soldiers' subconscious pattern recognition. Still, there is a persistent thread suggesting divine nudges through dreams, strategy that feels preordained. You grin at the idea of an owl perched invisibly in the barracks, observing, coaching, whispering subtle corrections only the attentive would notice. Nearby, a seasoned general supervises, scratching his beard, half amused by the chaos and half aware that something extraordinary is shaping outcomes. Athena's intervention is not brute force. It is gentle, almost mischievous, like nudging a chessboard just slightly so the pieces align themselves more effectively. Fringe interpretations even argue that entire campaigns may have been influenced by nocturnal counsel, generals waking with sudden insight after a night of dreaming. Historians still debate the veracity of these claims, but as you watch the soldiers, you feel the truth in the rhythm of movement, the subtle orchestration of human minds tuned by something beyond ordinary perception. As the morning sun rises higher, you notice sweat glinting on brows, the glint of metal, the faint hum of exertion. Athena's presence feels woven into the air, an invisible tutor shaping courage, timing, and foresight. You smile at the thought of mortal stories calling her guidance a whisper, because in truth, it's more like a nudge, a persistent suggestion that steers instinct without commanding it. Fringe accounts of dream-influenced maneuvers, owl messengers perched invisibly, and whispered advice feel ridiculous and yet intoxicatingly plausible. By the time you step back, leaving the training ground behind, you sense the faint hum of residual influence. Soldiers go about their drills, perhaps unaware, yet somehow guided, their instincts honed by something that is neither entirely human nor entirely divine. You realize that wisdom in war is rarely flamboyant. It is woven, thread by thread, in moments that pass unnoticed, except to those patient enough to perceive the subtle patterns. You continue along the ridge, the scent of pine and earth lingering in your nose, and wonder how many legends began in the quiet, invisible nudges of a goddess whispering strategies into human dreams. You wander into a small village just beyond Athens, where the clatter of looms rises above the murmur of conversation. The women here weave with focused grace, their fingers darting through threads like musicians plucking invisible strings. And then, you feel it, the faint tension in the air, the kind that precedes myth. Somewhere among these weavers, a girl named Arachne dares to challenge the goddess herself. You smirk to yourself because really, who wakes up one morning and decides to outweave a deity? But arrogance has always been the most ambitious of mortal fabrics. You find Arachne seated near a window, her posture straight, her eyes burning with the fierce certainty of genius. Her hands move faster than thought, faster than pride should allow, and the tapestry she creates seems to shimmer in defiance. Athena's presence is not immediate, but it's approaching. Historians still argue whether this myth was meant to warn mortals against arrogance or to celebrate the audacity of human creativity. You stand there watching her thread spool out in silence, wondering if wisdom and hubris are truly opposites, or simply two threads twisted around the same spindle. Fringe versions of the tale suggest that Athena didn't strike Arachne in wrath, but rather whispered her into transformation, a spider's shape not as punishment, but as eternal permission to continue her craft. You can't help but grin at the poetic justice of it all, condemned or blessed to weave forever. You picture Athena watching from a shadowed corner, expression unreadable, deciding that perhaps the best lesson is endurance. And even though the classic story paints her as angry, you sense something gentler in the air now, a kind of resigned admiration. After all, the only thing more divine than perfection is the mortal who dares to reach for it. The air shivers as the goddess arrives. There's no thunder, no spectacle, just a cool breeze that smells faintly of olive leaves and iron. You hear the whisper before you see her, calm, assessing, and slightly amused. Arachne doesn't flinch. She meets the divine gaze head-on, fingers steady, weaving faster. You almost laugh at the tension. It's not a battle, it's a duet. Athena's power radiates through stillness. Arachne's rebellion thrums in motion. Fringe scholars insist that the contest represented more than vanity. It was a philosophical argument, a woven debate about human mastery versus divine authority. Historians still argue whether the story condemns pride or celebrates innovation. You lean in closer, sensing both truths tangled in the same web. The finished tapestries unfurl like twin scrolls of truth. Athena's shows gods in all their order and dignity. Arachne's, mortals, flawed but brilliant, challenging Olympus itself. The goddess examines the mortal's work, and for a fleeting second, even she seems to hesitate. It's too beautiful, too precise, too bold. You realize the tragedy isn't that Arachne lost. It's that she was too good to win. You stifle a sigh, watching Athena's shadow lengthen, her whisper slicing softly through the air like a blade hidden in silk. When the transformation comes, it's slow and quiet. Arachne gasps, then softens, limbs narrowing, her form folding inward as if drawn into her own creation. And then she's gone, replaced by a spider spinning endlessly in the corner. The workshop falls silent. The apprentices bow their heads, but the spider continues to move, thread glinting like strands of moonlight. You feel Athena's presence ease, a mixture of sorrow and inevitability. She does not gloat. She simply turns away, whispering something that might be pity or respect. Fringe myths even claim that she left the spider a blessing. Spin forever, mortal, and remind the world that craft and courage are kin. You step outside into the fading light, the smell of wool and olive oil lingering behind you. The wind carries a faint whisper of thread stretching and snapping, endless, eternal. You look up at the sky, wondering whether Athena's whisper truly punishes or preserves. You think back on Arachne's courage, her refusal to bow, and you realize that perhaps the goddess's wisdom lies not just in restraint or reason, but in knowing that mortals, when they dream, can rival the gods. You smile, shaking your head. Maybe the world needs both, the whisperer and the weaver. Night falls again, soft and deep, and the streets of Athens glow faintly with the golden breath of oil lamps. You wander past an open courtyard and spot them, owls. Dozens, maybe hundreds, perched along the columns, silent as judgment, their eyes two small galaxies reflecting the firelight. You pause, holding your breath, because in this hush you can almost hear her again. Athena doesn't need to speak. The owls do it for her. You've seen her owl before, carved into coins, painted on pottery, stamped into the very idea of wisdom. But here, under this moonlight, the symbol feels alive. Historians still argue whether the owl was chosen for Athena or Athena for the owl, whether its reputation for seeing through darkness predates her mythology or became sacred because of it. You suspect it's both, a quiet partnership of perception. After all, who else but a goddess of wisdom would pick a creature that blinks slowly and judges everyone without saying a word? Fringe tales take it further, of course. Some say these owls weren't just symbols. They were messengers of dreams. According to an obscure story whispered by late-night philosophers, the kind who've had a bit too much wine and insight. Athena's owls didn't hoot at all. They murmured in ancient dialects, carrying divine hints between the waking and the sleeping. You imagine that, a parliament of owls flapping through the night, sprinkling dreams into mortal minds like post-it notes from Olympus. It's absurd and strangely comforting. You can't decide whether to laugh or shiver. You follow the soundless wings into a grove beyond the city. The night is thick with the hum of cicadas, and somewhere overhead, the moon hangs low and swollen, a polished coin in a sky of velvet. You feel watched, but not threatened. The sensation is oddly familiar, like being observed by a teacher who already knows your answer. Athena's presence is here, feathered and thoughtful. You recall that some fringe interpretations claimed her owl wasn't just a pet, but an extension of her mind, a literal embodiment of wisdom that could travel where she could not. Historians naturally scoff at that. There's no proof, no owl diaries or divine aviaries, but still the idea sticks. A faint breeze stirs the olive branches, and the owls shift, dozens of necks turning in eerie synchronization. You realize they're all looking in the same direction, toward a sleeping man lying by a small campfire. He stirs slightly, mumbling something, and you can't help but wonder what Athena's whisper sounds like inside a dream. Maybe it's not a voice at all. Maybe it's a sudden thought that clicks perfectly into place. A solution to a problem, a verse to a poem, a strategy for tomorrow's challenge. Wisdom rarely announces itself. It arrives disguised as your own idea. You smile, recognizing that pattern. You walk past the sleeping man, careful not to wake him, and continue deeper into the grove. The night grows heavier, but not darker. The owls follow, silent escorts of ancient knowing. Fringe myths describe how early Athenians used to leave bits of bread or polished stones at crossroads to feed the owl, believing Athena would favor those who nourished her messengers. You chuckle under your breath, feeding wisdom itself like a neighborhood stray. But then again, isn't that what learning feels like? Small offerings to something greater, hoping it lingers. As you reach the clearing's edge, you glance back. The grove is alive with stillness, a paradox only Athena could master. The owls, the fire, the sleeping man, it all feels orchestrated, as if the entire night exists for the purpose of one whisper, one invisible spark of thought, leaping from divine to mortal. You feel her gaze brush past you, distant but intimate, and realize how quiet true intelligence is. It doesn't demand to be seen. It watches. It waits. By the time you step out into the open air, dawn's first colors are bleeding into the horizon. The owls remain, their eyes glimmering like embers, and for a moment, you understand why Athena chose them. Not for beauty or power, but for patience. You take a slow breath, smiling faintly. Maybe wisdom isn't something the gods give. Maybe it's something they remind us we already have, hidden in the stillness, waiting to wake. The path slopes downward toward the shoreline, where the Aegean hums softly like a sleeping god. The air smells of salt and fig leaves, a mingling of earth and memory. In the distance, a single ship drifts lazily, its sail furled, anchored in the stillness before dawn. You pause to listen, to the slow rhythm of waves against stone, to the heartbeat of the world that somehow never stopped echoing the age of gods. It feels like a hymn left unfinished. This coast has seen everything. Kings kneeling before oracles, soldiers washing blood from their armor, poets tossing verses into the sea hoping for divine approval. Somewhere beneath these waves, the ruins of forgotten temples sleep, marble and coral fused together like prayer and silence. You wonder if the gods can still hear through all that water, or if the ocean has learned to keep its own counsel. A whisper rises with the wind, not a word, but a suggestion, and it brings with it a name: Poseidon. The earth trembles slightly beneath your feet, a reminder that he too was once here, not merely as myth, but as presence. His temples were the loud ones, carved into cliffs, echoing with chants and salt. Yet history remembers him in contradictions. Both protector and destroyer, giver of calm harbors and father of storms. Sailors feared him, yes, but they also loved him, because fear and faith are twins born of the same sea. You look again at the anchored ship. Its reflection dances on the surface, fractured and alive. A sailor once wrote that Poseidon's true temple wasn't built of marble, but of every ripple that carried light. You like that thought. It feels truer than scripture. The gods didn't need houses. They needed eyes willing to see the sacred in motion. Fringe stories, those wild, untamed cousins of official myth, tell stranger tales still. In one, Poseidon never left. He merely dissolved into the sea itself, trading form for foreverness. Each storm, each tide, is his exhale. Each shell on the shore, a syllable of his name. Some even say the foam at the crest of a breaking wave holds fragments of his laughter. Playful, unpredictable, sometimes cruel. You stand there, half tempted to test the theory, but the sea offers no confirmation, only reflection. You crouch near the edge and dip your fingers into the water. It's colder than expected, sharper somehow, like touching time itself. The surface wavers, and for an instant you think you see faces, thousands, maybe millions, flickering in and out of existence. Sailors lost to storms, lovers waiting on cliffs, priests with eyes rolled white mid-prayer. They vanish as quickly as they appeared, and all that remains is the steady pull of the tide, patient as destiny. Some say Poseidon's trident wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol of dominion over the three realms of the sea: the surface, the deep, and the current that runs beneath both. To hold it was to command not just the ocean's movement, but its moods. That's why mortals never truly controlled the waves. They could navigate, they could endure, but they could never rule. The ocean doesn't obey, it remembers. You rise and begin walking along the coast, your footprints vanishing almost as soon as they form. Each step feels temporary, yet somehow sacred. In the distance, a small shrine stands half-collapsed, its pillars worn smooth by centuries of wind. You approach, brushing sand from an inscription nearly erased by time. The letters are faint, but legible enough. To him who knows no shore. You exhale slowly, tasting the salt on your lips. It's easy to forget that the Greeks didn't see their gods as perfect. They saw them as vast. Poseidon wasn't a moral compass. He was inevitability. A gull cries overhead, and the sound startles you with its sharpness. The sky is lighter now, streaked with lavender and silver. Dawn has nearly arrived. You look back once more at the sea and catch a strange, fleeting shimmer just beyond the horizon, like sunlight glancing off something enormous moving beneath the surface. You tell yourself it's just imagination. Still, you whisper a quiet thanks, just in case. The wind shifts, and the sea answers with a sigh. You stand there for a while longer, watching the light rise from the water until it feels like the whole world is breathing in rhythm again. There's no thunder, no divine proclamation, just the gentle insistence of the waves. You turn inland at last, leaving the sea to its endless dreaming, carrying with you a realization. The gods may have retreated, but the sacred never did. It lingers, in the sea spray, in the stillness, in the way the world hums when no one is speaking. The inland path is lined with olives, twisted silver-leaved trees whose roots have clung to the same soil since the Bronze Age. Their branches stretch like arthritic arms toward the morning sun, and you can almost hear them creak as if remembering. The breeze carries a scent both sharp and sweet. Crushed leaves, dust, and that faint metallic hint of dawn. Somewhere behind you, the sea murmurs farewell. Ahead lies Athens, the city she built, the child of her mind. You crest a small hill, and there it is, the Acropolis. Even from a distance, it still commands silence. Marble glows gold in the rising light, columns standing like ribs of an eternal creature that refuses to die. You can imagine the hum that once filled this place. Sandals slapping stone, merchants shouting prices, philosophers arguing about everything from justice to whether a shadow could think. Athens was never just a city. It was an idea made of flesh, marble, and argument, and all of it. Every column, every law, every philosophical tantrum owed its spark to Athena. Not through miracles or thunder, but through thought. She didn't hand mortals power. She handed them the tools to create it. Her victory wasn't in temples or trophies, but in ideas that refused to decay. Historians still argue whether her myth grew because Athens needed her, or whether Athens grew because she demanded it. Either way, You feel her presence in every gust of wind that sweeps through the ruins. You wander through what remains of the agora, where merchants once sold olives and gossip. The stones are uneven, sun-warmed, and stubbornly real. Somewhere here, Pericles stood before his people and declared that democracy, an absurd experiment at the time, was the city's heart. A century later, Plato and Aristotle would dissect that heart in public like gossiping surgeons. You grin at the irony. Imagine trying that in modern politics. Hey everyone, let's question the entire meaning of justice before lunch. A mainstream fact floats up in your mind like a fish breaking water. The contest between Athena and Poseidon for the city's patronage. He struck the ground with his trident, and water burst forth, salty, undrinkable, but dramatic. She planted an olive tree, quiet, practical, eternal. Guess who won? The olive became the city's symbol, the living embodiment of wisdom over spectacle. It still grows here, thousands of years later, as if mocking every god who ever tried to impress mortals with thunder. Fringe accounts, though, whisper something different. Some say Poseidon's spring wasn't salt water at all. It was tears. Tears shed not from defeat, but from awe at her foresight. Others claim the olive tree she planted wasn't real, but a metaphor for reason itself. Rooted, patient, impervious to storms. The first olive tree that stood on the Acropolis, legend says, burned during the Persian invasion, only to sprout again from its ashes the very next day. You tilt your head at that detail. Divine miracle or really good horticulture? Historians still argue whether it happened or was simply good propaganda. As you walk closer to the Parthenon, the scale becomes overwhelming. Even half-ruined, it feels alive. The marble catches light the way human skin catches memory, softly, tenderly, with a faint glow that seems to come from within. The temple was once filled with song and sacrifice, its colossal statue of Athena rising high above mortals, plated in gold and ivory. Her eyes, they said, shone with gemstones that reflected firelight so vividly that sailors could navigate by them. You imagine standing beneath that gaze, a mortal trying to look wise under the scrutiny of a goddess of logic. No pressure, right? You sit on a fallen block, brushing your fingers over the grooves carved by hands long gone. They feel warm, as if history refuses to cool. A cicada drones lazily somewhere, and a pigeon coos from the rafters. Proof that life, however mundane, still rules here. You find that comforting. Civilization isn't the marble, it's the hum between the stones. Athena must have known that when she chose this city. She didn't just bless Athens with wisdom, she infected it with curiosity. That's far more dangerous and far more beautiful. You close your eyes, listening. The air hums differently here. It's the hum of thousands of minds that once refused to stop asking questions, even when the answers hurt. The hum of architects aligning pillars with the stars, of mathematicians measuring shadows to understand time, of playwrights mocking kings and gods alike. The hum of a goddess who whispered, "Think," and mortals who dared to obey. You open your eyes again to see the Parthenon shining against the morning. Tourists, centuries away, will someday swarm here with cameras, but for now, it's just you and the hum of eternity. You can almost hear Athena herself, amused, maybe proud, watching from wherever reason hides when the world forgets it. You smile, whispering a quiet thanks for every stubborn thinker who ever challenged a god, a king, or a crowd. You don't need to believe in miracles to stand here and feel awe. Belief, after all, is just another kind of thinking. You leave the marble heights of Athens behind, winding down through the dry scrub and ochre dust toward the open plains where myths breathe differently. The air changes here. It smells less like history and more like possibility. Cicadas trill. The wind whispers through thorn bushes, curling around your ankles like a mischievous cat. You follow the sound of a shepherd's flute somewhere in the distance, soft and lilting, almost like a lullaby for the gods themselves. It's here, in the open land, that stories of Athena take on a new tone. Away from the temples and philosophers, she becomes something more intimate, less a goddess carved in marble, more a quiet voice guiding mortals through their private storms. Farmers called her protector of olive groves. Weavers whispered her name before starting their work. Even warriors prayed for her, not for strength, but for judgment. And that distinction, you realize, is what set her apart from all the others. She never asked mortals to worship her through fear. She asked them to think. You come upon a small, forgotten shrine, a single column still standing amid grass and rubble, with the faint carving of an owl at its base. The wings are worn smooth, the eyes hollowed out by time, but the presence is unmistakable. You crouch and touch the stone. It's warm, almost unnervingly so. The owl, her symbol, her eternal messenger. Mainstream historians point out that owls were common in ancient Athens, nesting in temple rafters and feasting on mice. But to the Greeks, they weren't just birds. They were omens of clarity. Watching eyes that saw not only in darkness, but through it. Fringe tales claim those owls weren't just symbolic. They were fragments of Athena herself. Some versions of myth describe her sending owls as vessels of her thought, living lenses that transmitted mortal deeds back to Olympus. Historians still argue whether this belief came from literal sightings or the metaphorical obsession with wisdom. You grin at the image of invisible ancient Greek surveillance drones fluttering above battlefields, silently judging tactical blunders. Somewhere, Athena probably rolled her eyes before offering a better formation in a dream. You sit beneath the lone column, feeling the afternoon sun press against your skin. The shadows grow longer, the light thickening into that honeyed hue that makes even ruins look sacred. You imagine a young woman here centuries ago, perhaps a weaver, perhaps a widow, kneeling and whispering a prayer not for riches or romance, but for patience. That was Athena's kind of devotion, humble, practical, quietly resilient. She wasn't the goddess of miracles. She was the goddess of doing the hard thing right. You trace a line in the dust with your finger. It feels like writing without paper, or maybe memory without words. And somewhere inside, you feel a small ache, a recognition of what humans have always wanted from their gods. Not intervention, but reassurance that they're not entirely alone in their effort. Athena's gift wasn't to fix what was broken. It was to make mortals brave enough to mend it themselves. A gust of wind stirs the grass, and for a moment, you swear it forms a spiral, like the whirls of a seashell or the pattern of a thought uncoiling. It passes as quickly as it came, but the feeling lingers. You realize how deeply the Greeks understood their gods as metaphors wearing human faces. Athena's wisdom wasn't divine monopoly. It was a reflection of human potential. Her myth simply gave shape to something that already existed inside every act of reason, empathy, or restraint. The flute's melody returns, faint but steady, echoing from beyond the hills. Maybe the shepherd isn't real. Maybe it's just memory playing tricks. You rise slowly, brushing dust from your palms. Around you, the landscape stretches wide and endless, golden in the dying light. You can almost imagine Athena walking beside you, silent, her expression unreadable, her stride deliberate. Not the towering goddess of marble, but something subtler, a thought walking in human rhythm. And there's humor in that too. You chuckle softly, imagining her frustration watching mortals invent war after war, philosophy after philosophy, each convinced it had found the final truth. She must have face-palmed countless times through history. But still, she stayed, woven into ideas, into justice, into every quiet act of courage that didn't make headlines. Her temples may crumble, but her presence survives wherever logic and compassion coexist. The sun dips lower, brushing the horizon with streaks of violet. You pause one last time to look back at the shrine. The owl's shadow stretches long across the ground, pointing east, as if guiding your next step. You smile at the thought. It's exactly what she would do. Not command, not demand. Just point quietly and expect you to figure it out. You take a slow breath, the air thick with dust and gold. The hum of the world settles around you like a heartbeat. The olive trees rustle, the flute fades into silence, and you continue walking into the long, thoughtful dusk, guided, as mortals have always been, by the faint, patient whisper of reason disguised as divinity. The road leads you toward Delphi, a place that hums with mystery even before you see the first column. The mountain slopes ahead are cut with winding paths, and the air here feels thinner, as if you're already halfway between the mortal world and something that doesn't bother with definitions. Every breath tastes like iron and pine sap. You pause to rest on a rock, and the silence wraps around you like a heavy cloak. It's that kind of silence, the ancient kind, that makes you aware of how small you are and how big the universe has always been. Delphi was never Athena's domain. It belonged to Apollo, the golden god of light, prophecy, and questionable hair decisions. But her influence is here, buried in the logic that once governed madness. Before any oracle whispered her riddles, Athena stood watch over this place as Pranaya, the guardian who kept chaos at the temple gate. She was the stillness before revelation, the pause before a god spoke. You picture her, standing tall before the sanctuary, as priests and petitioners filed in with questions about wars, crops, love, or fate. She never answered directly. She let Apollo handle the theatrics. But you can't shake the feeling she made sure the questions were asked clearly first. A mainstream historical fact. The temple of Athena Pranaya actually existed below the main complex of Delphi, a smaller sanctuary often visited before pilgrims climbed to Apollo's oracle. It was said that no seeker entered the domain of prophecy without passing under her gaze first. You like that. It feels right. Wisdom as the gatekeeper of faith. Fringe interpretations get weirder. Some claim Athena Pranaya's temple predates Apollo's entirely, that she once ruled Delphi's oracle herself, before the myths rewrote the script to favor the sun god. There's even an old fragment from a lost hymn suggesting that her owl perched where Apollo's laurel tree later grew. Historians still argue whether that line refers to a literal temple rivalry or just theological poetry. But the thought lingers that even the god of light once needed a goddess of clarity to illuminate the shadows he couldn't see. You step forward, imagining what it must have been like. The scent of laurel leaves burning in bronze bowls, the sound of sandals scuffing against stone, the echo of prayers rising like mist. Pilgrims came from every corner of the known world, each believing their question mattered most. Kings begged for victory, poets asked for truth, farmers for rain. Some heard what they wanted, others left in despair. You imagine Athena's invisible hand steadying those who listened instead of demanding. Wisdom doesn't shout. It waits for silence to make sense of noise. The air here feels charged, like standing in the eye of a storm that never fully dissipated. You close your eyes, and for a second, you hear whispers, not in words, but in tone. Low, deliberate, rhythmic. It could be the wind or memory. Ancient oracles inhaled vapors from fissures in the earth before delivering their cryptic messages. Modern geologists discovered traces of ethylene gas beneath Delphi's ruins, a mild hallucinogen capable of inducing trance states. You grin. So maybe prophecy was just chemistry and charisma, but even then. Isn't it amazing how humans turned science into magic before science knew it was science? You walk slowly toward the Tholos, the circular temple that once marked Athena's sanctuary. Only 3 columns remain, their fluted sides glowing in the soft afternoon light. They look fragile but timeless, like the vertebrae of an immortal spine. You run your hand over the marble and feel the faint vibration of wind against stone. The sound is low, almost like breathing. You whisper without really planning to, "You never left, did you?" For a heartbeat, nothing answers. Then a gust rises from the gorge below, swirling dust and wildflowers into the air. The petals shimmer briefly before falling, scattering across the temple floor. You smile. Maybe it's just coincidence, or maybe it's the goddess acknowledging your curiosity. Either way, you take it. There's an odd, almost cosmic humor in all of this. How the ancients traveled for weeks to seek prophecy, only to receive riddles that required more thinking than praying. You imagine some poor general asking if he'll win the war, only to hear, "A great empire will fall." Ambiguous enough to keep the gods blameless no matter who lost. You snort softly. If that isn't the most divine version of customer service ever invented, nothing is. But Athena's hand in it all feels clear now. She wasn't there to give comfort. She was there to sharpen understanding, to turn blind faith into informed curiosity. Delphi wasn't about answers. It was about the courage to keep asking even when the gods spoke in riddles. The last light of day catches the marble, tinting it rose gold. You take a deep breath, feeling the thin mountain air sting your lungs, and realize how strange and beautiful it is that a ruin can still hum with purpose. The stones, the silence, the view, they all whisper the same thing. Wisdom is not knowing, it's learning to listen. You linger for a while longer, tracing the shadow of one surviving column as it stretches toward the edge of the world. The wind sighs again, carrying with it something faint and melodic. Not Apollo's lyre this time. Something softer. Something that sounds suspiciously like the flutter of wings. You descend from Delphi at dusk, the sky melting into streaks of bronze and violet. The The path is narrow, winding, and half swallowed by wild thyme and rock rose. Every few steps, you catch the scent of crushed herbs underfoot, sharp, grounding, ancient. You walk slower now, not from fatigue, but reverence. It's impossible to hurry through a landscape that feels like the gods might still be watching from behind the next olive tree. Below, the valley spreads out in waves of shadow and light, dotted with the faint flicker of distant hearths. Somewhere down there, farmers prepare their evening bread. Storytellers gather around fires, and someone, somewhere, recites one of the old hymns. You can almost hear it carried by the wind, not sung, but breathed, as if the earth itself is keeping memory alive. This is where you start to feel how Athena's wisdom bled from temples into people. She was no longer just marble and myth. She became a voice inside their rituals, their choices, their sense of what right felt like. She was in the way they built homes with symmetry, in how they debated law beneath moonlight, in how they carved justice into the bones of everyday life. Wisdom wasn't a gift anymore. It was a discipline. A mainstream historical fact lingers in your mind. In classical Athens, the goddess's festival, the Panathenæa, was celebrated every 4 years with processions, music, and games. The city would bring her a new robe woven by young maidens, a peplos embroidered with scenes of her triumph over the giants. The ritual wasn't just devotion. It was civic pride, a way to remind themselves that intellect and creativity were as sacred as prayer. You grin, imagining the spectacle. Thousands of Athenians marching, philosophers pretending not to care about fashion while secretly judging embroidery quality. Fringe tales say that the first of those peploi, the divine robes, weren't woven by mortals at all. Some claimed Athena herself appeared in the night before the festival, guiding the maidens' hands. Others whispered she wove part of it invisibly, leaving a single thread of divine gold running through the mortal cloth. Historians still argue whether this belief arose from symbolism or pure poetic embellishment. Either way, you can't help but love the image. The goddess of intellect, literally embroidering herself into the city's identity. You pause near a stream and kneel to cup your hands into the water. It's shockingly cold, almost metallic, and reflects the dying light like liquid glass. For a moment, your own reflection looks older, wiser maybe. Or maybe that's just how twilight works, turning everyone briefly into myth. You remember a line from an old fragment. Wisdom is not seeing the light, but walking toward it when it flickers. That feels like something Athena would say. Straightforward, slightly sarcastic, and profoundly true. The first stars appear. Their light feels softer here, filtered through centuries of storytelling. You keep walking, and the darkness deepens, but it doesn't feel hostile. It feels like permission to think, to question, to breathe. And somewhere in that quiet, you realize something subtle. Athena's wisdom was never confined to the divine feminine. It wasn't about gender or rank or even faith. It was about the universal hunger to understand. That's why she survived long after her temples fell. You can suppress belief, but you can't silence curiosity. You reach a flat ridge overlooking the valley. The air has cooled, and the sounds of the world, the crickets, the stream, the occasional bark of a shepherd's dog, merge into a rhythm so even it feels like the earth itself is dozing. You sit down, wrapping your arms around your knees. The moon rises, pale and deliberate, casting silver across the olive groves below. The light catches the leaves, and for a moment, the landscape looks like it's been brushed with molten glass. You can't tell where the divine ends and the human begins. You remember how the myths said Athena was born fully formed, from Zeus's head, in a burst of light and thunder. But sitting here, that story feels more symbolic than supernatural. Maybe she wasn't born that way at all. Maybe she emerged from the human need to believe that thought itself could be holy. That the act of understanding was, in its own way, a form of worship. You smile faintly at the idea. If that's true, then every philosopher who ever asked a hard question, every artist who ever tried to paint truth, every scientist who ever refused an easy answer, they were all, in their way, Athena's children. You picture her rolling her eyes fondly at each of them. Congratulations, mortal, you discovered logic. Again, the night thickens, warm and fragrant. Fireflies begin to appear. Tiny sparks, flickering like the remnants of divine thought scattered across the earth. You follow one with your eyes until it disappears into the tall grass. Then another. Then another. You lean back, hands pressed to the cool ground, and realize how beautiful it is that humans once looked at lights in the dark and called them gods, when maybe all along they were seeing reflections of their own brilliance. You exhale slowly, letting that thought settle. The stars pulse brighter now, the moon steady and kind. For the first time in hours, you stop walking. You just listen. To the wind, to the water, to whatever remains of her whisper, still threading through time, patient and wise. You wake before dawn, still leaning against a stone, the night's cool air clinging to your clothes like fog. The world feels paused, caught in that delicate heartbeat between darkness and light. The horizon glows faintly, as if the gods themselves are deciding whether to let the sun return. You stretch, wincing slightly, and take in your surroundings. A grove of olive trees framing the edge of the ridge, their gnarled limbs reaching upward like weathered prayers. Somewhere nearby, an owl hoots once, a single echoing note, and you can't help but smile. Of course she'd check in. Athena's presence feels quieter now, less the whispering voice of myth and more the gentle hum of awareness itself. You start walking again, following the faint path leading down into the valley. Each step stirs dust and dew, tiny motes glittering in the pale morning light. The landscape feels alive, half asleep, half remembering. You imagine ancient processions winding through here long ago, carrying olive branches and woven robes, singing her praises in rhythmic chants that mixed reverence with pride. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind as you walk. Athena wasn't worshipped just in Athens. Her influence stretched across the entire Greek world, from Rhodes to Sparta, from Troy to Sicily. In each place, she took on a slightly different form: protector of heroes, patron of artisans, guardian of law. Some even called her Aegean, the worker goddess, honoring her mastery over crafts and invention. You grin at that title. It suits her far more than the typical divine virgin label poets love to fixate on. She wasn't aloof. She was industrious. If Olympus had an HR department, she'd be running it with color-coded scrolls and terrifying efficiency. Fringe interpretations claim that Athena's worship actually originated from an even older goddess, a Bronze Age figure tied to the snake and owl, symbols of wisdom and rebirth. According to some archaeologists, The earliest shrines to her were carved into caves, not built on hilltops, suggesting she began as a goddess of earth and intuition before becoming the patron of intellect and war strategy. Historians still argue whether this shift was cultural evolution or deliberate political rebranding. You imagine Athena overhearing that debate and sighing, "Yes, mortals, congratulations, you've rediscovered marketing." The sun edges over the horizon now, and the world turns gold. Every olive leaf catches light. Every shadow breathes. You descend further until you reach a small cluster of ruins. Foundations of houses, maybe, long abandoned, but still stubbornly here. You pause beside one half-buried threshold, tracing the edge of a doorway that no longer opens to anywhere. You can almost picture it. A family once sitting here, eating olives and bread, telling stories by lamplight. The mother teaching her daughter to weave. The father discussing the day's debates in the agora. Wisdom not shouted from temples, but whispered in daily life. That's the legacy that endures. You take a seat on one of the fallen stones and watch the morning fully unfold. Birds begin to stir. A shepherd passes in the distance, his flock moving like a drifting cloud of white wool. You hear his voice, low and content, carrying a tune that feels as old as the soil. For a moment, you envy the simplicity of it. Not ignorance, just balance. The kind of peace that doesn't need explanation because it's already rooted in understanding. There's something deeply human about this, about needing gods to personify what we already possess. Athena wasn't wisdom itself. She was the mirror we built to remind ourselves that wisdom exists. You can't help but think how fitting it is that she never demanded temples dripping in blood or gold. She wanted minds alive with questions. She wanted debate. She wanted the fire of curiosity to stay lit long after her statues crumbled. You chuckle softly because, well, it worked. We still ask, still argue, still reach for meaning in the dark. You pull a small olive from a branch overhead, its skin cool and smooth against your thumb. It's not ripe yet, bitter if you bite it, but you hold it anyway, rolling it between your fingers. It feels symbolic somehow, the fruit of patience, of time, of work done long before you ever arrived to enjoy it. The same way wisdom grows, not gifted by gods, but cultivated through endurance. As the sun rises higher, you notice something flicker across the sky. A single owl gliding low, wings stretched wide against the golden light. It passes over you soundlessly, its shadow brushing your face like a passing thought. You watch it until it disappears beyond the ridge. Maybe it's coincidence, or maybe, just maybe, it's her way of saying she's still watching, still amused by humanity's stubbornness, still whispering ideas into the dreams of anyone willing to listen. You stand, brush the dust from your clothes, and start walking again. The valley opens before you, shimmering like a page waiting to be written on. You think of all the thinkers who walked these lands, Socrates, who questioned everything, Aristotle, who turned thought into science, Hypatia, who taught in defiance of ignorance centuries later. They were all part of the same inheritance, the whisper that said, "Think for yourself." You look up once more at the clear sky, impossibly blue, and say quietly, "Still thinking, Athena." A soft wind answers, curling around your shoulders, gentle and knowing. You smile. It's enough. By the time you reach the sea again, the day has settled into its full rhythm. heat rising from the stones, cicadas humming like invisible machinery, and the faint smell of salt sharpening every breath. The Aegean stretches before you in deep sapphire bands, each ripple catching sunlight like scattered coins. You find a shaded spot beneath a leaning olive tree and sit, letting the breeze do its quiet work. For the first time in what feels like forever, you have nothing left to climb toward, nothing left to prove. Just the steady rhythm of water against rock and the slow dance of time. The shoreline looks unchanged, as if it's been waiting for millennia. You can imagine triremes slicing through this same water, their sails tight with wind, carrying merchants, soldiers, and dreamers alike. Somewhere out there once sailed Odysseus, Athena's favorite troublemaker, the one she couldn't resist rescuing over and over. You can almost hear her teasing him. Clever boy, maybe don't insult the gods this time. Of course, he never listened. You grin. Some things about humanity never evolve. Historically, the connection between Athena and Odysseus shaped much of how Greeks viewed wisdom, not as abstract knowledge, but as the practical, sometimes mischievous intelligence needed to survive chaos. She didn't hand him answers. She challenged him to think his way through storms. Historians still argue whether Homer intended Athena as Odysseus's divine protector or as a symbolic reflection of his own mind. The debate is almost poetic. Was she real, or simply the personification of his reason whispering through fear? You suspect Athena would smirk and say, "Does it matter?" He listened. There's a fringe story, though, one buried in dusty manuscripts and dismissed by many scholars, that says after Odysseus's death, Athena wept. Not the cinematic kind of divine grief, but a single tear that fell into the Ionian Sea, turning part of it into a strangely pale turquoise hue. Sailors once claimed that calm waters in that region were blessed by her mourning, a reminder that even gods could love the minds of mortals. You look out across the horizon, and sure enough, the water near the shallows is lighter, shimmering like glass. Maybe the myth got one thing right. Wisdom always leaves traces of tenderness behind. The day drifts on, sunlight dancing on the waves, and your mind drifts with it. Back to the Acropolis, back to that first whisper of owl wings in the dark. You remember how the myths described Athena's birth. Bursting from Zeus's head in full armor, a goddess of war and thought combined. If you step back and look at that image through the lens of logic rather than legend, it almost reads like an allegory for consciousness itself. Reason born from chaos, order splitting open confusion. Historians still argue whether that myth was a political metaphor for Athens' rise or simply a divine flex of Zeus's headaches. Either way, it worked. Humanity remembered her not as wrathful or vain, but as balanced. A rare quality, even among gods. You pluck a pebble from the sand and toss it into the surf, watching concentric circles widen until they fade. That's how wisdom spreads, isn't it? Not with explosions or sermons, but in ripples. Quiet, steady, reaching farther than the hand that made them. Athena never forced her lessons. She suggested them, whispered them into the corners of sleep and the flicker of thought. And maybe that's why her stories endure. Not because they command belief, but because they invite reflection. The olive leaves whisper overhead, and you lean back against the trunk. You can almost hear faint voices carried on the wind. Ancient philosophers murmuring from marble courtyards, scribes scratching ink across papyrus, soldiers praying before battle, artisans weaving under lamplight. They're all fragments of her echo, scattered through time but united by curiosity. You smile as you realize that, in her own divine way, Athena was less a goddess of temples and more a teacher of persistence. There's an old saying attributed to a later Greek philosopher: "The owl flies at dusk." It means wisdom arrives when the world quiets down, when the noise fades enough for thought to breathe. You let that line settle into your chest, slow and heavy, as the sun begins its descent. The light softens to amber, the sky deepens into a bruise of lavender, and shadows grow long across the sand. You close your eyes and listen, waves, wind, heartbeat. Somewhere within that mix, there's something quieter still. Not words exactly, but presence. You recognize it immediately. Athena doesn't need to appear. She's there in the stillness itself. You think about modern times, how our temples are glowing screens and our prayers come in pixels. Would she laugh at that or find it brilliant? Probably both. If anyone could appreciate the human urge to innovate and overthink simultaneously, it would be her. You chuckle softly, imagining Athena trying to navigate social media, endless debates, questionable life hacks, and the constant ping of chaos. She'd likely roll her eyes, adjust her armor, and say, "Fine, let's turn this noise into knowledge." And somehow, she would. Even now, sitting by this imaginary sea, you feel the ancient and the present blending seamlessly, the myth and the mundane touching fingertips. That's her real magic. Athena never vanished. She just changed address. She lives in every curious question, every act of empathy disguised as strategy, every moment you pause before reacting. Her temple is wherever thought and compassion coexist. As twilight finally arrives, the horizon blurs between sea and sky. You watch a few early stars emerge, tiny sparks rekindling the memory of Olympus. The first owl calls again, low and rhythmic, almost like a lullaby. The world feels perfectly balanced for a heartbeat. Divine and human, thought and feeling, night and day. You breathe out slowly, and the whisper that follows could almost be hers, soft, knowing, and endlessly patient. Keep thinking. Night returns gently, almost like a secret. The air cools as the horizon folds into shadow, and you sit there, still beneath the same olive tree, feeling the earth slow its pulse. Waves roll in and out with lazy rhythm, and the stars above the Aegean flicker one by one, tiny windows opening into infinity. You tilt your head back, letting the sky fill your vision, and for a moment, you swear you can see faint lines connecting them, constellations forming in patterns both ancient and new. Somewhere among them, Athena's owl glides silently, wings brushing the edge of eternity. You've come a long way, from the birth of a goddess inside Zeus's thunderous skull to the echoing steps of philosophers in marble halls, from myths carved on amphorae to the whispers of sailors who still pray for calm seas. Every story, every dream, every fragment of wonder you followed tonight, all of it leads here, to this quiet moment. The gods, it seems, always end their lessons the same way, with silence and starlight. It's strange, isn't it, how wisdom feels. It doesn't roar like Zeus's lightning or sparkle like Aphrodite's mirror. It hums, soft, persistent, like the vibration of an idea that refuses to die. You feel it now, threaded through the air, woven into the fabric of everything. Athena's presence is no longer something outside of you. It's internal, a pulse beneath your thoughts. The realization lands gently. Wisdom isn't given by gods. It's remembered by humans. You pick up another olive branch, its slender leaves silver in the moonlight, and twirl it between your fingers. It's delicate but strong, bending easily, never breaking. No wonder it became her symbol. No wonder the Athenians crowned their victors with it instead of gold. Gold shines, olive endures. And that's what Athena always wanted humanity to understand. That brilliance means little without balance, and victory means nothing without understanding. A mainstream historical fact drifts across your mind as the sea sighs. In classical Athens, the olive tree was so sacred that destroying one, even accidentally, was punishable by exile. The myth said the first tree was Athena's gift to the city, springing from the rock where her spear struck during her contest with Poseidon. The sea god offered a fountain of salt water. Athena offered the olive, a symbol of sustenance, peace, and craftsmanship. Historians still argue whether this myth originated as political propaganda to justify Athens's identity as a city of intellect over brute strength. You laugh softly. It's a very human thing, turning divine duels into civic marketing campaigns. There's a fringe myth that says Athena didn't vanish after Greece fell under Rome's shadow. Instead, she wandered, crossing oceans in dreams, whispering to the curious minds of every generation. Some Renaissance painters claimed she guided their hands. Certain philosophers hinted she appeared in visions. Even early, scientists described sudden flashes of clarity as the goddess visiting. Maybe that's all metaphor. Or maybe the line between myth and memory is thinner than we like to admit. You lie back against the sand, the sky an ocean of blue-black velvet above you. Your body feels weightless, as though drifting between waking and sleep. Every breath slows, every sound softens. You start to wonder if this perfect in-between, is where Athena lives. Not in marble temples, not in the loud proclamations of faith, but in the pause before the next thought. The whisper between inspiration and action. The sacred stillness of comprehension. The owl returns, its silhouette gliding across the moon, its cry low and soothing. You follow it with your eyes until it disappears into the stars. Somewhere in your chest, you feel that same quiet urge to follow, to keep learning, keep wondering, keep questioning. That's her gift, you realize. Not knowledge, but the hunger for it. You think of the thinkers who came after, Plato, Aristotle, Hypatia, each one a ripple of her legacy. Even today, in lecture halls and late-night brainstorms, her influence hums. Every time someone pauses before speaking, rethinks a bad decision, or chooses logic over impulse, that's her whisper. The goddess never demanded temples of stone. She wanted temples of thought. You close your eyes and listen to the night breathe. The rhythm of waves becomes slower, deeper, almost like a lullaby. The scent of the sea mixes with the faint sweetness of crushed olives. Everything fades into one harmonious hush. You imagine Athena herself sitting nearby. No armor, no helmet, just quiet grace, watching humanity stumble, learn, and rise again. Maybe she smiles, maybe she sighs, but you know she's still here, walking through the corridors of every mind brave enough to seek reason amid chaos. The last sound you hear before drifting off is that same soft voice. almost playful this time. Sleep well, thinker. The night deepens. The last trace of sunlight fades completely, and the stars take full command of the sky. You breathe in slowly, deeply, letting the cool air fill your chest. The world is still. The sea has quieted, the wind has softened, and even your thoughts begin to dissolve into calm. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Athens sleeps too. The Parthenon rests in its eternal half-ruin. The olive trees sway gently on the hills, and the echoes of old prayers mingle with the hum of the city that never quite forgets its origins. The myths, the gods, the stories, they've all turned to whispers, blending seamlessly with the rhythm of time. But wisdom never really fades. It only waits for the next dreamer to listen. You exhale slowly. The sound of waves lulls your heartbeat into steady harmony. For a moment, everything, past and present, divine and human, feels beautifully balanced. You let that feeling hold you, warm and weightless, as your mind begins to drift. If Athena still walks the world, she's walking quietly tonight, barefoot across moonlit sand, her owl following close behind. And if she pauses beside you, she won't speak. She'll simply nod, as if to say, "You've learned enough for now. Rest." So you do. You let go. The world turns softly beneath you, and the stars keep watch.